the warmth of the Hawaiian welcome. And thank you so much, Mayor, for your leadership and that welcome. I was intrigued that you mentioned Canadian mayors by saying you can meet us in bars at 10:30 at night. At least it's not 10:30 in the morning. I also want to acknowledge Mayor Garcetti and Mayor Benjamin for their leadership as well. I think we all know what it's like to try and lead an organization of mayors, an incredible privilege, but really hard work. And thank you both, and Mayor Benjamin particularly, for the U.S. Conference of Mayors and its leadership. And finally, I'd like to thank Eric for his presentation. I thought that was very interesting, a little bit daunting, and at the end, he said very clearly that it's up to cities to show leadership if we're going to address these transportation challenges, not only the ones we have today about transportation, climate, and equity, but the ones that are coming because of new technologies, which I thought was a great message from a private sector consulting group, and one that's a fantastic lead-in to our panel. So I think I first wanted to really follow up on that with our two mayors, perhaps starting with you, Mayor Castor. We know that it's an issue for cities of all sizes, not just large, small, medium, in between. How do we reduce the need for private, make sure zero carbon, address the challenge McKinsey presented of having a plan and a strategy that helps guide what's going to happen through technology?
It's quite a daunting question. So here I am, July 1st will be 2 months as mayor. So
you have all
I definitely there's tax drive to increase our sales tax by a penny for transportation solutions, which will mean roughly $35 million a year just for the city of Tampa, not to mention 2 other cities in the county in which we reside. We have really no form of mass transit in our community. Our bus system was one of the worst in the nation and had been cut dramatically. So it's something that we have somewhat a blank slate that we can look at. Another issue that's affecting us, as is I'm sure every other mayor, is the affordable housing crisis as well. And so looking at not only providing mass transit ideas, but also putting that mass transit, putting those transfer points where we can construct affordable housing as well. We're looking at electric buses. I just signed off on some paperwork the other day for grant funding in that area as well. And then we have an automated vehicle pilot program in Tampa, which I believe is one of 2 in the nation. And so we're starting to get out on that front as well. We just had, I've been actually in the city for 2 months now, the electric scooters, looking at the e-bikes that are just growing. I think that's the next biggest wave in transportation, especially down in our particular area. But the transportation, we have the ability to move towards, the transportation forms that can reduce our carbon footprint dramatically while also taking a number of cars off of the road. We too, I know Mayor Garcetti said that the number of cars that they have in California, but I think if you looked proportionally, probably in the South, the 2 things we like are our cars and our guns. And so those, it's difficult to get people into any form of mass transit, especially the bus system. So we're looking at not only what we can do to reduce that carbon footprint through transportation, but also solve other issues, most importantly, the affordable housing issue in our community.
Thanks very much, Mayor Castro. I'd like to ask some more. Sorry, I cut off your applause. Thanks very much, Mayor Castor. You're no longer a rookie after that round of applause. I'd like to delve into that a bit more in a minute, but maybe we can ask, obviously, warmth here, and people know Austin and are very aware of some of the great initiatives, particularly around electricity and solar. Can you talk from the perspective of a Texas city, one that where people like their cars as well. How do you address the transportation challenges that Eric was talking about, and the ones that you see and have seen as mayor, in a way that helps move towards the low-carbon future that you're building in Austin?
Well, it's hard, and it requires cultural and behavioral changes, not only collectively, but certainly at an individual level. And Texas also a state where people love their cars. I think Austin has, I think the statistic I just saw was that 74% of the people that commute into our downtown are driving alone in their cars. In a city that has 1 million people right now and 2 million people in the metropolitan area, projected within 25 years to double, so have 2 million people in the city and 4 million people in the metropolitan area. If we're still anywhere near that percentage, then no one is moving in our city. So for us to be able to get from here to there, we have to take that 74% number by 2039 from 74% down to 50%. We have to increase our folks that are regularly commuting on bicycles from 1 to 4%, people that are walking to where it is that they need to work, doubling that from 2 to 4%, increasing transit usage from 4 to 16%. But it's those incremental things that together that would enable us to meet our goals by 2039. But it is that heavy a lift. And it's hard in Texas. We live in a state that really doesn't provide cities the funding tools and options that many cities have around the country because we don't control our revenue. We can't decide to increase our sales tax. We're reliant to a degree on funding on our property tax and bonding. So there's a limitation there. We just did the largest mobility bond in the history of our city. It was $720 million. We were pretty proud of that until we noticed that Seattle on the same day, their voters were going to the poll and approving a $54 billion bond package, and Phoenix was approving a $26 billion package. So we're having to scrape and find different ways to be able to fund the changes. But that's what we're doing. So we're going to be taking to the voters a regional mass transit system, which we've never really developed in Austin on dedicated pathways. We're focusing a lot on micromobility solutions. Openly embracing new platforms and technologies like the shared bicycles and scooters. I think in March, our city, in the 12th month that we had scooters, last March, we had 700,000 scooter rides in our city. And that's both really good and real challenging because our roads are not, and our sidewalks and our system, our right-of-way are not set up for that modality. We're redoing our land development code so as to increase density along transit corridors and to create more urban centers in our city so that not everybody needs to commute and work downtown. We're electrifying fleets. We're incenting and giving development incentives for people that are providing charging stations. We're increasing the numbers in our city. We're electrifying our fleets within the city, and our transit system is now purchasing electric buses and promises never to purchase anything else going forward. So it's for us. It's doing lots of little things and everything we can. Our big climate change goal, and we've been really successful here recently. We have reduced our carbon emissions by 22%. Or that's our goal, and we're on track to get that done by 2020. That's with our population increasing. That's based on a 2010 benchmark. So we'll be down next year by 22%. We've done most of that, as you indicated, with energy generation, wind and solar, with 47% renewable right now with a 65% goal by 2027. But our next big hump is going to be in transportation.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that in a second. And thanks and congratulations on those initiatives. I think Texas is the world capital of the oil industry. And to have such a penetration of solar and wind, I think really speaks to the leadership of the city and shows all of us what's possible. That's non-rookie applause. They're used to Mayor Adler's incredible achievements here. Mayor Castor, can you talk a bit more? You said it's ground zero, and this, I understand Tampa. People choose individual cars because it's a sign that you're part of the norm, and that you're essentially rebuilding a transit system from scratch. And how do you do that? And I know it's early days for you, but I think people will be interested in your thinking about, as you try to move, because you're seeing the consequences of climate change now, and they're serious for Florida, and starting to address it through transportation, how do you move from a place that essentially doesn't rely on transit to one that has a transit system that's actually going to work for people and be meaningful and useful?
Well, I'll use our bus system as an example. We have the opportunity so with the city, we really don't control transportation funding. It's the federal, state, and county that controls that funding. So our bus system is actually run by Hillsborough County. And that's one of the areas that we have an opportunity to, in essence, just recreate that from, the large buses traveling throughout the county to smaller transportation systems to connect. But we also have to change in the South, we have to change that culture. You look at other cities, a lot of your cities across the nation, and the bus service is looked at as a viable form of transportation. In the South, quite often, it's looked as transportation for poor people. And so when you get a job where you can afford a car, you're buying that car and getting out on the road because that's a sign of success. So we need to change that mindset as well towards public mass transit and try to encourage, as Mayor Adler said, you see one person in the cars on the street, on the highways every single day. People complain about congestion, but it isn't to the point that they'll park that car and use another form of transportation. So one, we have to make it reliable, and two, we have to change that mindset and that culture. And I think that we can do that, especially with a lot of the younger generation, the younger generations leading that charge. So that's important. Also, the connectivity through streetcars. That's something that we're looking at. Again, a smaller form that's moving anywhere from 40 to 60 people at a time throughout the city. And then looking at greenways. Right now, Tampa is just literally I shouldn't say literally, is on fire. It is just growing just at a rapid pace. So we have the opportunity to create the future for our city, to create that city that we all want to live and work in. And transportation is a huge portion of that, to ensure that our development is in concert with those transportation answers, looking at the public-private partnerships for Greenway, connecting to take bicycles off of the roadway. I've been a cyclist my entire life, very avid. We're always in the top 3 of the worst locations for pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. So it's kind of hard to embrace the complete street idea and then encourage people to go out and ride their bicycles when it's so dangerous to do so. So those are things that we need to change as well, to make sure that we can take the cyclists off the street whenever possible. But again, providing those forms of transportation with the automated vehicles as well that will move large numbers of individuals while reducing that carbon footprint. And I also feel that we always talk about the bike lanes, but I really think we need to look more at the regulation of public space, because the e-scooter or the e-scooters, I thought we were a lot. We had 60 to 70,000 rides the first month they were in, and then I heard the mayor say that they were hundreds of thousands. So I guess we need to start riding those things a little more often. But you just don't know the way the technology is changing is what the next form of that transportation is as well. And then we also, the previous speaker talked about the private initiatives for transportation. We have Brightline Virgin trains now that's in Miami. They're up to West Palm and going to Orlando, and then simultaneously they're going to build a line from Orlando to Tampa that will connect us, and then we in turn have to connect with St. Petersburg and Clearwater across the water. But we have the ability, I feel we have the ability to write that plan now. And here's one of the things that was, people always ask you, so in your short time as mayor, what were some of the biggest surprises? And as a police officer, you know, we're used to showing up at scenes, people throw you a set of facts, you make a decision, and then you move on. So my first transportation, speaking with transportation, I said, we need an east-west connector. We're in essence, bifurcated from our downtown, and then we have a West Shore area that actually has more business office space than our downtown at one point, and our airport's out that way. So we need a connection between those two. And they just got so excited. They're like, oh my gosh, this is great. We can have a streetcar plan through here. And then they said, okay, it'll take 3 to 5 years to do an environmental study. I'm like, well, I'm looking at 2 to 3 years for the entire project to be done. So that's going to be I think one of the biggest adjustments for me is to adjust to those time frames to actually get things done.
I think the time frame should adjust to you, Mayor, and I suspect most of the mayors in here agree with that.
Yeah, it probably would have been right. It probably would have been a little easier when I was carrying a gun to get them to adjust to my time frame, but we'll see, we'll see.
By streetcar, you mean electric?
Yes,
mass
well,
transit?
electric and rubber tire, because we have a streetcar now that connects our entertainment district with the downtown, and then we're going to move that through a couple of different neighborhoods, and hopefully it'll be electric the majority of the way, but there may be a rubber tire portion of it.
Got it. Well, I'm struck by both of you are talking about the connection between development and transport, which I think all of us get, but is very critical. And I thought, Mayor Adler, maybe you could talk a bit more from this challenge that you face as a city where people predominantly commute by single person in a car that is facing growth, and how you steer that. And a second part of that, how do you pay for the transportation infrastructure? You're talking about some of the challenges in Texas where your sources of revenue are constrained. And can you just address a bit about how in a place where maybe there's some political challenges in trying to steer growth in a way that encourages other ways of getting around, how do you steer that as a mayor, and how do you pay for it?
Well, none of the actions or choices are easy, and all of them are fraught with political peril. But it's also the kind of work that has to be done. So the land development code in our city, we're increasing density along our commercial transportation corridors. We're making them multi-use so as to allow residential development in almost all commercial areas. That gives the cultural war between the folks that want to build greater height and density and neighborhoods that are trying to protect character. We're trying to balance that, focusing on that transition area between the corridors and the neighborhoods, but there's going to be an incursion into the neighborhoods where we increase the opportunities for duplexes and triplexes and quads and walk-ups, and it's not happening easily. We had our last election in November became a referendum on those issues, on the development issues, but now we're freed up and we're able to move forward on that. You know, we have one of our highways that we just put in demand managed toll lanes. Nobody likes toll lanes to be put on a road. We put some on without losing any public lanes, and they're demand managed, which means that it has a variable toll rate, so that as the demand in the number of cars moving into those toll lanes increases, the toll rises. And it happens automatically, and it's designed to rise with the number of cars so as to always maintain 45 miles an hour speed limit on those express lanes, which means that transit, which can ride in those, is always traveling 45 miles an hour. and can be doing that alongside regular traffic that is stopped in gridlock. The thought being that if enough people watch buses go past them quickly, somebody's going to get out of their car and get on the bus. It has us dealing with the political issue of having elite lanes where people who can afford to can buy their way into less traffic. I talk about those lanes as being transit lanes and those people helping to pay for the transit lanes that we need. And I often am in town hall meetings where I say I'm perfectly happy for somebody to pay to get out of my free lane. In fact, if everybody would pay to get out of my free lane, that would be okay with me too, because then there wouldn't be anybody in my lane and I could just continue to go. But we're doing things like building transportation demand management requirements into our development so that new developments are building in TDM opportunities, building charging stations, connecting more with the bicycle pathways in the network and the urban trail system that we're setting up in the city, providing more opportunities for dock space. For shared mobilities and micro-mobility options. We've implemented a transportation user fee, impact fee in our city because we're not allowed to raise taxes, but we can charge for services. So we'll try doing that until the Texas legislature comes back into session and takes that away from us. But maybe it'll be something that
Well,
will
would never
stick.
happen, would it?
Yeah. Maybe it'll be something that we can have that will stick. You know, it's a lot of it is using our land development code to try to incentivize the kind of development we want. Left to its own desires, the marketplace will have greater and greater sprawl. More and more developments happening more and more at the perimeter. That's going to increase the number of people that are commuting. It's going to increase the congestion. You know, I tell people in my city that want me just to add 4 more lanes to the main highway into the city, free lanes. And I tell them, you know, if we did that, 2 things would happen. The first thing that would happen, if we could snap our fingers and make it happen, the first thing that would happen is tomorrow there would be free flow traffic on those highways, and everybody would celebrate, and it would be a wonderful day. And the second thing that would happen is the cities that are at the far end of those highways, the housing prices in those communities would go up by 40%. And the reason that would happen is because now you could live in those communities and commute to downtown Austin in 20 minutes. And the people who aren't buying homes there now, because it takes 45 minutes to come downtown, now will go buy homes. And people will start building those homes and buying those homes because they can get down so quickly. And in 2 years, the traffic on that highway would be exactly the way that it is today. And it's getting people to believe that, which requires the cultural change, move away from cars into different modes, which means that it's incumbent upon us to have additional modes that are better choices. They're cheaper, they're faster, they're more convenient. And if somebody ever takes them and then learns that their daughter is sick at school, they know they can get to her and that school as quickly, not having driven to work, as they could have if they had driven to work.
You know, can I add on just real quickly? So the toll roads, that just came up as a solution, and through my neighborhood, which is very civically active, and there was so much pushback to the toll roads that literally the plan became, let's tear the entire interstate down and build a promenade. So I'm still not sure what that all thing's about, but just to tell you you said the political peril, that toll lanes, I mean, are just, they're not welcome, that's for sure, in Florida.
It's interesting to get no lanes instead of toll lanes. So in the couple minutes we got left before we go to questions from your colleagues and fellow mayors, can you address the issue of equity? And we've hinted at it in several different ways, not just tolling, but the fact that transit often serves lower income neighborhoods and communities. Cities are becoming less and less affordable because the price of housing, you've both mentioned that in your remarks in the context of development. How do we address transportation from a climate perspective in ways that also builds a city that is fairer and more just and more affordable for people? Any thoughts? You got a couple of minutes each.
I would just say that you have to intertwine those. I mean, it has to be something that is very purposeful, and they have to be connected. It's a conversation that we have, is we don't have a transportation conversation that doesn't involve affordable housing in some way in our community. And one of the things that we've been able to explore and hopefully will come to fruition is we have a railroad line that goes through our city that went from one of the ports over, and for the most part delivered chemicals to the water treatment, which we don't really use anymore. So that's a possibility of a commuter rail there, where you have the infrastructure in essence is in place, and it goes through several economically challenged areas in our community. And that really will be a game changer for those neighborhoods, to be able to connect them to jobs, to school, to medical facilities, to wherever they want to go, entertainment as well, to wherever the citizens want to go in a way that they haven't had before, which really we haven't had in our entire community, but it's so much more meaningful in the economically challenged areas. And so that will be a focus for us as well.
Mayor Adler, any thoughts on this, on equity?
Well, I think that equity is a huge issue. And even in cities where so many things are going so well, like in Austin, equity is a huge challenge, equal opportunity and access. So it has to be something that is your first filter with respect to everything you're doing. We've created an equity office that has an equity tool now, so that every new policy in the city goes through a deliberate vetting process to see how it's going to impact equity, both in intended and unintended ways. In mobility in particular, I think building out the transit system is going to be key. It is so expensive to operate a car now. And if you don't have the car and you're in a city that's dependent on cars, it's impossible to get to a job on a regular basis because of the length of time it takes to commute and the delays in that kind of system. It's hard to get to doctors. It's hard to persist in an ongoing medical treatment if you can't move. So it's key. So you have to build out that system and make it work. It was interesting, in our city we just did a remap of our transit system such as it exists, so as to try to increase frequency and the usability of transit. When you're working with a fixed budget, one of the first things that gets compromised if you want to move in that direction is reach. And sometimes the reach that you're compromising are to areas and communities that are transit dependent. Yet another one of these political peril kinds of issues. But when we analyzed it and looked at it, we realized that even if we were sacrificing reach to all parts of our city, in some ways, that by the frequency that we were increasing the headways, the speeds in those communities that needed it the most, in such a way that it actually became a viable transportation choice in those communities. So it turned out to be something that became the much more equitable and fair and progressive solution. And we find that our city right now is up about 10% on transit usage year to year. In a time when in most cities transit usage is going down. It's taking the new technologies and making sure that they're available to everyone. So many of the new technologies are based on app and those kinds of things, making sure that they're accessible for everyone. And then it's taking a really hard look at how you're building and where you're building your docking stations and your infrastructure, so as to ensure that it is being something that's equitably placed.
Terrific, and a good example of what's possible. We've got about 20 minutes now, I think, for questions. Am I? 10. Okay, I have instructions. Although that looked like 0-1 to me. 10. We've got 10 minutes for questions. I have to give you some instructions, okay? And then I will come right here. And here are the instructions. Before we take a few questions from the mayors in the audience, I'd like to ask for all the mayors to please log on to menti.com and answer the interactive questions on this topic. Remember, you'll need the passcode located in your folder on the inside right corner. We'll have 2 interactive questions during the Q&A that I'll read out when it's time for you to respond. So log into Menti, but I'm first going to take a question from Mayor Cutter, because you had your hand up. Mayor, there'll be a microphone. Just give 1 sec. And while it's coming, I do want to say, here, I live in a city, Toronto, that has a great transit system, and our family doesn't run a car. And it's eminently possible, but it's because of what you said, Mayor Adler. I live near a subway station that comes every 5 minutes. So if I have to get home because my daughter's sick, I can, and I know it's reliable. Anyway, Mayor.
So we have Alameda County Transportation Commission, which guarantees a ride home. They'll pay for a taxi if you are somebody who rides the bus all the time or something like that. So that's one way to get businesses to be part of that solution. One of the things that I'm finding really hard is labor agreements. We have sometimes going to on-demand buses, but these buses are huge. They don't reach parts of our city, and they don't reach them at the right times because we have the commute hours bringing people to our BART system. And it's really difficult to get somebody to work a split shift or a part-time when you have these labor unions who are very entrenched California. So do you have any thoughts about that? Like what they can do for the other part? They're, in there from 7 to 9 transporting people, and you can't have that many field trips for the rest of the day. So any thoughts on that?
Quick answer from one of you, Mayor Adler. You put your mic up first.
Only to say I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. If it's a challenge that the transit folks are handling, they're handling it really well.
And, those are the things that you have to look at as well as encouraging part in the downtown area, encouraging businesses to purchase bus passes for their employees, which will cut down on them having to pay for that parking space, those types of, and then the last mile too for transportation. We have that as well, where there's with the ride share, the bus system partners with them. So if there's any emergency, they can do that and have that last mile. But it's always, that's why you have to make those data-driven decisions, because, buses aren't running at night, and you have so many of those jobs that are only available at night. So those are the things that we are looking to in the recreation of our bus system, making sure that we are addressing those topics.
All right, if you can go to Menti. And here's the question you're going to be asked to answer. In my city, we have prioritized implementing the following. A, installed bike lanes. B, electrified fleets. C, purchased electric buses. D, increased walkability. Okay, and you can see the results. There we are. So there's lots of bike lanes, lots of walkability, some electrified fleets, and a bit of electric buses. I'm going to do a promo. C40 did a study that shows in a busy transit system, electric buses are now cheaper to run life cycle because the maintenance is lower. So there's no reason we all shouldn't be buying electric buses going forward, full electric, no diesel. Okay, there's my promo. So I've got 2 hands up. That's all I'll be able to take because there's another Menti question. I'll go here, Mayor. If you can introduce yourself, then I'll come here. And good. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Hi, Mayor Megan Sally Wells from Culver City, California. We're talking about changing culture, and I'm in the middle of Los Angeles, so I know about the car culture. I'm wondering if you're in your communities, you're using a public health frame and an aging frame. In other words, public health as a transportation issue, from anywhere from not dying when you're walking or biking on your streets to air quality as a key issue for framing mobility. And then also age-friendly, Culver City, among many others, are part of AARP's age-friendly communities. And we see on the from the very young to the very old, we need to find transportation alternatives for all to have access.
Great. Are we using public health framing? Either one of you? It'll give us time to take another question.
We are with looking at programs like Vision Zero and making sure that it's, you believe in it. You're not just checking a box to say you signed on. So that's something that when I retired, I chaired our Bike Walk Tampa Bay, which was focused on safety. And then clearly from the standpoint of reducing that carbon footprint, that's something that's factored into all of our transportation conversations at this point, just because, the sea level rise is going to affect us as much, if not more, than any of the other communities around the world.
Okay,
Yes,
please. Oh,
and-
sorry. Go ahead, Mayor.
I would just say, yes, one of the interesting things that's happening in Austin right now is we have a pilot program. We have a foundation that came into Austin that said if you had a relatively unlimited budget to address changing culture with cycling in a community, how would you do it and what messages would work? And we're about to launch that here in another month or two. It's going to run for a year, and it's going to be a really concentrated focus on messaging to change culture with cycling, but at a level that ought to have an impact and ought to help tease out messages that really work.
And we'll all be stealing that idea from Austin. That's great.
I hope you are all stealing it from Austin. So there's another Menti question. If you could go have a look. What are the biggest barriers to low carbon mobility in your city? A, access to financing. B, lack of public buy-in. C, infrastructure challenges. D, other initiatives take priority. We've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask the panelists to respond to those once there are answers. And we've also got one question. So if you can all just operate within 3 minutes. Mayor, we have a mic here? Yeah. If you can introduce yourself. And
Thank you. John Marish from Beverly Hills. What do we all think of the Google Maps test? I just randomly put in how long it would take to go from Disney Hall in Los Angeles to Beverly Hills City Hall, where my office is. If I took public transportation, it takes 1 hour and 6 minutes, according to Google Maps. If I drive, it's 36 minutes. Shouldn't our collective goal be to create a system where we provide point-to-point on-demand mobility with public transportation that approximates what we could in theory do with the car? Recently I was in London, and just for kicks I did the same thing. It would have taken me 30 minutes by car to go to where I wanted to go, but only 20 minutes or 25 minutes by public transportation. Won't that represent the true democratization of public transportation? And don't AVs, autonomous vehicles, particularly in a form of shared mobility, play an important role? Because we talk about streets, we've invested in streets, and adding a lane doesn't do anything. Well, it actually may do something if we're sharing rides and we're using the roads more efficiently.
so we've got 1 minute left each. If you can either comment on that question or on the biggest barriers to low carbon mobility, which are infrastructure challenges and access to financing with lack of public buy-in coming along a bit. So Mayor Adler and then Mayor Castor, you'll have the last word.
So real fast, I would say that unless and until the choices are more convenient and less expensive and more effective than riding a car, nothing is ever going to displace riding a car. So I think that becomes kind of the existential challenge with respect to that. You mentioned autonomous vehicles and car sharing. Car sharing is key. Vehicle sharing is key. Shared trips are key because it puts more than one person into a vehicle. I'm concerned about autonomous vehicles. I'm concerned that autonomous vehicles could end up being something that induces traffic as much as it helps with traffic. Because suddenly now when I take my 3 girls to soccer practice in the evening and pick up dry cleaning, I'll have 4 cars go do it instead of me doing it. And on the one back here, for us, the biggest barrier is access to financing, because it's the financing we need to change the mobility infrastructure in our city.
Mayor Castor, 30 seconds. You got the last word as the newest mayor in the room.
All right, then. Yeah, I agree 100% with you, but, and I don't know that people talk about congestion and how they have had it. You know, everybody, you ask any citizen, they've had it with the road congestion, but everybody still gets in their car and drives to work every day. So until it's convenience, my prior life, I would say everybody's all for security until they're personally inconvenienced. And it's the same thing with our mobility. And until we can make that a more attractive option, people aren't going to take it. And I would have to say that the financing would be the biggest issue, without a doubt.
Fantastic. I want to thank and acknowledge our panelists and all of you for your great questions and your responses. Thank you, Mayor Adler, Mayor Castor.